It's a serene morning in Vatican City, the kind of day that feels steeped in history and reverence. St. Peter's Basilica stands tall, a symbol of faith and tradition, drawing visitors from all corners of the world. But today, something unusual is about to unfold. Among the throngs of tourists and pilgrims, a figure steps forward. A young man known more for his quiet demeanor than public appearances. It's Barron Trump, the youngest member of a family constantly in the global spotlight. As he quietly enters the sacred space, there's a sense of intrigue in the air. Why is he here? What could bring the son of a former US president to this hallowed ground on such a personal visit? As Barron approaches Pope Francis, the atmosphere changes. Witnesses describe an inexplicable stillness, a kind of calm that feels almost sacred, and then, in the most unexpected twist, something happens that leaves everyone, visitors, clergy, even the Pope himself, stunned. What unfolded in St. Peter's Basilica that day wasn't just another high-profile visit. It was a moment of profound mystery, connection, and inspiration that no one saw coming. Stay with us as we unravel the events of this extraordinary encounter and discover why it's resonating with millions around the globe. The story begins in the heart of Vatican City, a place where ancient architecture and spiritual traditions converge. St. Peter's Basilica, with its towering dome and awe-inspiring artwork, has always been a beacon for pilgrims seeking solace, tourists marveling at its grandeur, and world leaders paying their respects. But on this day, the usual hum of activity was tinged with a peculiar buzz. Something was different. As Barron Trump stepped into the basilica, it was impossible not to notice him. At just 17, he was already taller than most in the room, his presence striking, yet unassuming. Dressed simply in a tailored suit, he seemed out of place, yet perfectly at home, a paradox that added to the mystique. Unlike the typical entourage that might accompany someone of his status, Barron walked alone, his steps deliberate, his gaze steady. The basilica itself seemed to respond to his presence. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting vibrant patterns on the marble floor. The air was thick with incense, and the faint murmur of prayers echoed through the vast hall. Tourists whispered among themselves, unsure of what they were witnessing. Barron's demeanor was calm, almost meditative. He approached the center of the basilica, pausing to take in the majesty of Michelangelo's masterpiece. Observers noted a flicker of emotion on his face. Was it awe, reverence? Perhaps something deeper, something personal. In the distance, Pope Francis appeared, his white robes a stark contrast to the opulence around him. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and what happened next would leave everyone in the room, grappling for answers. As Barron stood there, gazing at the sacred art and architecture, something in the air shifted. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, a quiet tension that seemed to ripple through the space, as if everyone in the basilica was waiting for something to happen, though no one quite knew what. The crowd, initially caught up in their own spiritual reflections, began to take notice of Barron's presence. Whispers started to circulate. What was he doing here, alone? Why was he not with the usual entourage, the Secret Service agents, or even his family? It was unusual for such a high-profile figure to be in such a deeply personal setting without the typical fanfare. Yet there he was, quietly absorbing the grandeur of the basilica, seemingly lost in thought. His calm presence stood in stark contrast to the usual hustle of the Vatican, where every move of a public figure is meticulously calculated. Then, the doors at the far end of the basilica creaked open, and there stood Pope Francis. His appearance, humble and unassuming, was nothing short of mesmerizing. Pope Francis had always been a figure of compassion and warmth, known for his ability to connect with people on a deeply human level, regardless of their background. As he moved toward Barron, there was an air of curiosity about him as well. What did they discuss in those first few moments? What was exchanged between the two that felt so significant, yet impossible to fully comprehend? Observers noted how they spoke to each other, their conversation brief yet meaningful. The Pope seemed genuinely interested in Barron, his usual warm smile never leaving his face. And then, in a move no one expected, Barron did. Something that left the crowd stunned. Silence fell as he reached out and placed his hand on the Pope's shoulder. It was a gesture so simple yet so powerful that it seemed to echo throughout the basilica. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. The silence that followed felt charged with emotion, as if the room itself was holding its breath. What could this gesture mean? The crowd watched, unsure of what was happening but deeply moved by the exchange. The sense of anticipation grew. What lay ahead for this meeting between the young man and the Pope? What would be the significance of this unspoken connection? The moment of silent connection between Barron and Pope Francis lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. The crowd, though unsure of the specifics, could feel the depth of the encounter. It was as if something monumental was unfolding right before their eyes, though no one could quite put it into words. The Pope's gentle smile never wavered, and Barron, typically reserved, appeared to soften his usual composure. A personal moment was replaced by something more vulnerable, something human. As the two continued to speak, the conversation seemed to grow more intense. The words exchanged between them were too quiet to hear, but their body language spoke volumes. Barron, though young, seemed to be searching for something, an answer perhaps, or even reassurance. Pope Francis, with his years of wisdom, listened intently, his eyes focused and compassionate. For those watching from afar, it became clear that this meeting wasn't about political ties, celebrity status, or even family connections. This was a personal moment, one that transcended everything else. The way Barron looked at the Pope was as if he saw him not as a global religious figure, but as a symbol of something he longed for: guidance, peace, or perhaps a deeper understanding of the world around him. Something unexpected happened. The Pope, in turn, seemed to recognize the weight of Barron's unspoken thoughts, offering a quiet presence that spoke volumes. And then something unexpected happened. Barron, who had been standing silently beside the Pope, suddenly turned to face the crowd. His expression was still thoughtful, but there was a new energy about him, as though something within him had shifted. He raised his hand, motioning for the crowd to gather closer. At first, people were hesitant, unsure of the young man's intentions, but slowly they approached. When Barron spoke, it wasn't a grand speech, nor was it a declaration of any kind. Instead, he simply said, "We're all connected, even here, in a place like this, where everything feels so separate, we're still bound together. We're all human." The words, though simple, carried an undeniable weight. The crowd fell silent, as if absorbing the gravity of what he had just said. Was he speaking to the world? Was he addressing his own inner turmoil? Or was he trying to impart something deeper, something he had learned in that brief personal exchange with the Pope? Something profound happened. The room felt charged with something profound, and the connection between Barron and Pope Francis seemed to deepen even further. As the crowd processed Barron's words, a new sense of curiosity took over. What was the true meaning behind this meeting? Was there more to this story than met the eye? And what had Barron learned during his time with the Pope that would change the course of his life and possibly the world forever? As the final moments of Barron Trump's visit unfolded, an almost surreal tension filled the basilica. The crowd, still captivated by the exchange between the young man and Pope Francis, seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for something monumental to take place. Barron, standing side by side with the Pope, gazed out across the room, his face a mixture of contemplation and quiet resolve. For a brief moment, it was as if time itself had paused, caught in the delicate stillness of the moment. And then it happened. Pope Francis, with his usual kindness, reached out, placing a gentle hand on Barron's shoulder, an unexpected gesture of solidarity. As the Pope's hand rested on him, Barron closed his eyes for just a second, a soft breath escaping his lips. When his eyes opened again, there was a noticeable change in him. Something had clicked. The composure he had worn throughout the visit was replaced by a vulnerability that could not be ignored. It was in that precise moment that Barron began to speak, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying undeniable weight. "I've been searching for something,"